In a secluded convent nestled deep within the Pyrenees, an ancient curse stirs, casting shadows over the lives of the devout sisters who dwell there. When a mysterious black dog, silent, watchful, and unerringly intelligent, appears at their gates, its presence marks the beginning of an unraveling centuries-old secret. As eerie whispers fill the halls and spectral figures haunt the night, Sister Marguerite discovers the dog is more than it seems, a guardian, a guide, and perhaps the key to breaking the darkness that binds the land. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any exciting stories like this one. Here, each video is a journey of overcoming an emotion that you won't want to miss. The icy wind howled through the ancient stone corridors of the convent perched high in the Pyrenees. It was a place of solitude and prayer, surrounded by thick forests that often cloaked the mountains in mist. For centuries, it had been a haven of devotion, but in recent months, a pervasive sense of unease had settled over its inhabitants. "I heard footsteps again last night," Sister Colette said, her voice barely above a whisper as she clutched her rosary tightly. "They came from the west wing." "That wing has been sealed for decades," Mother Adele replied with stern finality, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. The West Wing had always been the subject of hushed conversations among the sisters, a forbidden zone rumored to harbor secrets from the convent's mysterious past. Yet, no one dared to set foot there, not since a tragedy shrouded in secrecy had occurred generations ago. Sister Marguerite listened quietly to the conversation as she worked in the convent's small vegetable garden. The cool October air was sharp against her skin, and the distant sound of crows cawing added to the eerie atmosphere. As she tended to the soil, something made her pause, a shadow at the gate. Standing at the entrance to the convent was a large black dog. Its coat gleamed even in the dim light, and its eyes, impossibly dark, fixed directly on Marguerite. The dog was motionless, exuding an aura of calm yet unmistakable intensity, as if waiting for her to notice. Marguerite froze, a strange knot tightening in her stomach. There was something unsettling about the animal, yet she couldn't look away. "What is it doing here?" she muttered under her breath. Against her better judgment, Marguerite found herself walking toward the dog. Each step felt heavier, her breath coming in short bursts. She stopped a few feet away, meeting the creature's gaze. Its eyes seemed almost human, carrying a depth of wisdom and sadness that she couldn't comprehend. "Marguerite." Mother Adele's voice cut through the air. Startled, Marguerite turned to see the older woman approaching with quick, determined strides. "What's going on here?" Adele demanded, her gaze shifting to the dog. "It just appeared," Marguerite replied, her voice trembling. "It hasn't moved. It just watches." Mother Adele observed the animal cautiously, stopping a safe distance away. There were no villages nearby, no farms for miles. How had the dog made its way to such an isolated place? "We'll deal with this in the morning," Adele declared. "For now, leave it be." But Marguerite couldn't ignore the strange sense of purpose in the dog's demeanor. As she reluctantly turned to follow Mother Adele back to the convent, she cast one last glance over her shoulder. The dog remained at the gate, unmoving, its piercing eyes following her every step. That night, the convent seemed more oppressive than ever. The wind battered the stone walls, rattling the shutters, and filling the corridors with a low, mournful howl. In her small room, Marguerite struggled to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt as if she were being watched. Unable to bear the unease, she got up and went to the window. The dog was still there, a dark silhouette against the moonlit courtyard, standing guard as if it were protecting something, or someone. Suddenly, a deep bark shattered the stillness. It was no ordinary bark, it reverberated through the convent like a warning. Marguerite's heart raced. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and ventured into the hallway, where she found Sister Colette standing, pale and trembling. "You heard it too?" Colette whispered. Marguerite nodded. Together, they walked to the main doors of the convent. The old wooden panels creaked as they opened them, and the cold night air stung their faces. But the dog was no longer at the gate. Instead, it stood in the middle of the courtyard, facing the dark forest beyond. Its posture was tense, its eyes fixed on something unseen. "What's it looking at?" Colette asked, her voice quivering. Marguerite took a step forward, her eyes locked on the dog. Deep down, she felt it wasn't there to harm them. It was waiting, watching, guarding. "I don't think it's our enemy," Marguerite murmured, more to herself than to Colette. Before either of them could move further, a shadow shifted in the distant tree-line. The dog growled low and steady, a sound that resonated in Marguerite's bones. Whatever was out there, it was only the beginning. Morning light filtered weakly through the clouds, casting a pale glow over the convent. The storm of the previous night had left the courtyard damp and the air heavy. Despite the day's peaceful appearance, the atmosphere among the sisters was tense. Sister Marguerite had been unable to shake the feeling that the dog's presence was more than a coincidence. While the others resumed their daily tasks, she found herself drawn back to the courtyard, half expecting the animal to have vanished. But Bonk Velho was still there, sitting at the same spot where she had last seen him. His dark, unwavering eyes met hers as if he had been waiting all night. Marguerite hesitated before stepping closer, her heart pounding in her chest. As she approached, the dog neither flinched nor growled. Instead, he lowered his head slightly, a gesture that felt oddly like acknowledgement. "Are you protecting us, or warning us?" she whispered, unsure if she expected an answer. Behind her, Sister Colette's voice broke her concentration. "Marguerite. You shouldn't be out here alone." Marguerite turned to find Colette standing at the edge of the courtyard, her arms folded tightly across her chest. "That dog is an ill omen," Colette said, her voice trembling. "You shouldn't trust it." "I don't think he means us harm," Marguerite replied, looking back at the animal. "There's something about him, something deliberate." Colette shook her head, visibly unnerved. "Mother Adele should have sent it away. Keeping it here, it's dangerous." Marguerite said nothing. She couldn't explain the inexplicable sense of connection she felt toward the dog. Bonk Velho remained motionless, watching them both as if silently bearing witness. By late afternoon, whispers of strange occurrences had spread among the sisters. Doors creaked open on their own, and the soft sound of footsteps echoed through the halls, even when no one was there. At vespers, the candles in the chapel flickered wildly as if caught in an invisible wind. Mother Adele, always composed, tightened her lips and led the prayers with extra fervor. After the service, she called a meeting in the main hall. "This unease cannot persist," she said, her authoritative voice cutting through the murmurs of the gathered sisters. "I will speak with the villagers tomorrow. Perhaps someone has lost their dog and can come to retrieve it. In the meantime, remain focused on your duties and do not let fear take hold." Marguerite wanted to protest but held her tongue. The idea of Bonk Velho leaving felt wrong, though she couldn't articulate why. That night, Marguerite was drawn once more to her window. Bonk Velho was there, sitting vigilantly in the courtyard. His silhouette against the moonlit sky was both imposing and reassuring. She opened her door quietly, her bare feet brushing against the cold stone floor as she made her way to the courtyard. The dog greeted her with a steady gaze. As she knelt beside him, a sudden gust of wind whipped through the air, carrying with it a low, haunting whistle that seemed to come from the nearby forest. Bonk Velho's ears perked up. He turned his head sharply toward the tree-line, his posture tense. "What is it?" Marguerite whispered, her voice almost drowned by the rustling leaves. Without warning, Bonk Velho stood and began walking toward the forest's edge. He stopped after a few steps, looking back at her expectantly. Marguerite's pulse quickened. She glanced over her shoulder at the convent, its walls bathed in faint moonlight. Following the dog into the woods was reckless, but something inside her compelled her to move forward. Wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders, she took her first step toward the unknown. The forest loomed dark and silent, each step carrying her farther from the safety of the convent. Bonk Velho led the way, his movements deliberate, his head occasionally turning to ensure Marguerite was still following. The air grew colder as they ventured deeper, and the faint scent of damp earth and decay filled her nostrils. The towering trees seemed to press in around her, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky. At last, the dog stopped in a small clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated structure, a forgotten cabin, its roof partially collapsed and its wooden walls covered in moss. Bonk Velho sat at the edge of the clearing, his gaze fixed on the cabin. Marguerite hesitated, her breath visible in the frigid air. Every instinct told her to turn back, but her curiosity outweighed her fear. She stepped closer to the cabin, her footfalls muffled by the soft earth. The door hung ajar, creaking as it swayed in the breeze. Inside, the shadows were thick, and the air was stifling. "What is this place?" Marguerite murmured, crossing the threshold. The room was almost bare, save for a large stone slab at its center, covered in a thin layer of dirt and moss. Bonk Velho entered behind her, his nails clicking softly against the floorboards. He moved to the slab and began pawing at its surface, sending dirt scattering across the floor. Marguerite watched, her chest tightening with anticipation. Beneath the dirt, faint carvings began to appear, ancient inscriptions etched into the stone. Her fingers trembled as she brushed away the remaining dirt, revealing Latin words she couldn't fully understand. She whispered the ones she could make out, pactum aeternum. An eternal pact. Her heart raced. What had Bonk Velho led her to? Marguerite's trembling fingers traced the Latin carvings on the stone slab, the phrase pactum aeternum ringing ominously in her ears. The chill of the room seemed to deepen, wrapping around her like an unseen shroud. Bonk Velho stood beside her, his dark eyes fixed on the inscriptions as though he, too, understood the gravity of what they had uncovered. The silence was broken by the sound of footsteps outside. Marguerite turned sharply, her heart pounding, just as the door creaked open to reveal Mother Adele and Sister Colette. Both women froze at the threshold, their expressions a mixture of anger and fear. "Marguerite," Mother Adele said in a low, severe voice. "What is the meaning of this? Why are you here? And why have you brought that dog?" Marguerite stood, dusting her hands on her skirts as she struggled to form an answer. "Bonk Velho led me here," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something on this slab, something ancient. It speaks of an eternal pact." Mother Adele stepped cautiously into the room, her sharp eyes scanning the inscriptions. "These carvings are older than the convent itself," she muttered, almost to herself. "This language, it's the Latin of the medieval church." Sister Colette lingered in the doorway, clutching her rosary as though it might ward off whatever dark forces were at play. "We shouldn't be here," she said, her voice trembling. "This place feels wrong." Ignoring Colette, Mother Adele knelt beside the slab, her face set in a grim mask of determination. "These inscriptions speak of betrayal, of a covenant sealed by blood." She glanced at Marguerite, her expression dark. "This isn't just any pact, it's tied to this land, to the very foundation of our convent." Back at the convent, the three women gathered in the library, their breaths visible in the damp, cold air. Bonk Velho followed silently, his heavy footsteps echoing off the stone walls. Mother Adele retrieved an ancient ledger bound in cracked leather from a locked cabinet. It was one of the oldest books in their collection, rarely touched except in times of necessity. Dust rose in delicate spirals as she placed it on the table and began flipping through its fragile pages. Marguerite and Colette watched in silence as Mother Adele stopped at a page filled with faded script and detailed illustrations. "This ledger," she began, "records the history of the land before the convent was built. It mentions an order of knights, a splinter group of the Templars, who once controlled this territory." Marguerite leaned closer, her heart pounding. Knights? What does it say about them? Mother Adele's finger hovered over the faded text. They were said to have sought eternal power through unspeakable means. The eternal pact carved on that slab is no mere phrase, it was their covenant with the unknown. Colette gasped audibly, crossing herself. A covenant? With what? Mother Adele's lips pressed into a thin line. That isn't clear, she admitted. But it was something dark. Something that demanded a price. As the hours passed, the sisters pored over the text, piecing together fragments of the story. The knights, desperate to maintain their dominion, had struck a deal with a force that promised power and protection. In exchange, their souls were bound to the land, and a great relic was buried to seal the covenant. That slab in the cabin, Marguerite said, realization dawning on her. It must be where they buried the relic. Mother Adele nodded grimly. And that relic, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, is likely the source of the disturbances plaguing our convent. As if to confirm her words, a sudden gust of wind blew through the library, extinguishing the candles and plunging the room into darkness. Colette shrieked, clutching her rosary tightly. Bonk Velho let out a low growl, his body tense as he stared into the shadows. Marguerite felt her blood run cold. Something was moving in the darkness, a faint rustle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. Stay together, Mother Adele commanded, her voice steady despite the fear that flickered in her eyes. Slowly, Marguerite lit a candle, its flickering glow revealing nothing but shelves of dusty books. Still, the oppressive feeling of being watched lingered, heavy and suffocating. The next morning, the sisters gathered in the main hall to discuss their findings. Despite the rising fear, Mother Adele's leadership kept them focused. We have no choice, she declared. The relic must be unearthed and dealt with. If it remains buried, it will continue to spread its corruption through these walls. But how can we approach it safely? Colette asked, her voice quaking. What if it's cursed? Mother Adele glanced at Bonk Velho, who sat at Marguerite's feet like a loyal sentinel. The dog has already led us to the truth, she said. Perhaps he is here to guide us further. Marguerite felt a surge of determination. I'll go to the cabin again, she said firmly. Whatever is buried beneath that slab, it needs to be uncovered. Mother Adele placed a hand on her shoulder. You will not go alone, she said. We will face this together. Prepare yourselves, sisters. Tonight, we return to the cabin. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, the sisters gathered their tools, lanterns, shovels, and their unwavering faith. Bonk Velho led the way through the darkening forest, his movements purposeful and calm. When they reached the cabin, the air was thick with anticipation. The slab in the center of the room seemed to hum with a faint, otherworldly energy. As the sisters began to dig, Marguerite felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her. Finally, their shovels struck something solid. Clearing away the remaining dirt, they uncovered a wooden chest adorned with intricate carvings. Its metal hinges were rusted, but the craftsmanship was unmistakably ancient. Marguerite's hands trembled as she pried open the chest. Inside lay a small, ornate relic, a silver cross inlaid with blood-red gemstones that seemed to pulse faintly in the lantern light. The room grew colder, and an almost imperceptible whisper filled the air. Bonk Velho let out a sharp bark, breaking the spell. This is it, Mother Adele said, her voice filled with both awe and dread. The source of the pact, and the reason for our torment. Marguerite's eyes met Bonk Velho's. The dog's gaze was steady, as though urging her onward. They had uncovered the relic, but the true challenge was just beginning. The silver cross, pulsing faintly in the lantern light, seemed to exude a malevolent presence. The cold in the cabin deepened as Marguerite held it aloft, her breath catching as whispers swirled around her, soft, dissonant voices that were neither here nor there. Bonk Velho growled low, his stance protective as though guarding the sisters from whatever unseen forces had stirred. "We can't leave this here," Mother Adele said finally, her voice resolute. "This relic is the anchor of the pact. If it remains hidden, the corruption will persist." Marguerite wrapped the relic in a cloth and placed it in a small satchel, the weight feeling far heavier than it should have been. As they prepared to leave the cabin, the forest seemed to close in around them. The rustling of leaves, once a natural backdrop, now felt like the presence of watchful eyes. Bonk Velho took the lead once again, guiding them back to the convent. Despite the unease in their hearts, the sisters knew that the answers to their questions lay within the ancient texts of the convent's archive. That night, the air inside the convent was thick with tension. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows across the stone walls as Mother Adele and Marguerite worked feverishly in the library. Dusty tomes and scrolls lay scattered across the table, their pages filled with faded ink and cryptic symbols. Colette sat nearby, visibly uneasy. "What if the whispers follow us here?" she asked, clutching her rosary tightly. "They already have," Marguerite murmured without looking up, her eyes scanning the aged parchment before her. Mother Adele, ever the pragmatic leader, motioned for silence. "Focus," she commanded, her finger tracing the lines of an old journal. "If the relic is the key to the pact, we must find the ritual to sever it. The Templars left these secrets buried for a reason." Marguerite frowned as she deciphered another passage in the ledger they had retrieved earlier. "This is no ordinary relic. It wasn't just a symbol of their faith, it was their offering." "An offering to what?" Colette asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marguerite hesitated before answering. "Something beyond mortal comprehension. Something that granted them power but demanded their souls in return." Mother Adele nodded grimly, turning a page in the journal. "According to this text, the pact bound not only the knights but the very land itself. This convent stands on cursed ground." Colette gasped audibly, her knuckles white as she gripped her rosary. "We're living in the shadow of their sin." "It seems so," Mother Adele replied. "But there's hope. The writings suggest a ritual, a way to sever the pact and free the souls bound to it." As midnight approached, Marguerite and Mother Adele found what they had been searching for, a detailed description of the ritual. The text was written in an archaic Latin script, the words woven with prayers and invocations. "The ritual must be performed where the pact was sealed," Marguerite read aloud. "And it requires both the relic and the willing faith of those present to succeed." "That would mean," Colette began, her voice trailing off as realization struck. "We must return to the cabin." Mother Adele nodded gravely. "And the relic must be destroyed during the ritual. Only then will the curse be lifted." The faint sound of a low growl drew their attention. Bonk Velho, who had been lying silently by the hearth, now stood alert, his ears perked and his gaze fixed on the dark hallway beyond the library. "What is it?" Marguerite asked, rising to her feet. Before anyone could respond, the candles in the library extinguished all at once, plunging the room into darkness. The oppressive whispers returned, louder this time, circling them like a spectral wind. "Stay together," Mother Adele ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. Marguerite clutched the satchel tightly as Bonk Velho positioned himself between the sisters and the unseen presence. His growl grew deeper, vibrating through the stone floor, as if challenging the very shadows themselves. When the candles were relit, the whispers ceased, leaving only a deafening silence in their wake. The sisters exchanged uneasy glances. "This is no coincidence," Mother Adele said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "Whatever force is bound to this relic knows we're preparing to break the pact." "Then we must act quickly," Marguerite added. "The longer we wait, the stronger it becomes." They agreed to perform the ritual the following night. Preparations began immediately. The sisters worked tirelessly, gathering what was needed: blessed water, candles, and the sacred texts required for the invocations. The relic, still wrapped in cloth, seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. Marguerite felt its dark energy pulsing faintly against her chest as she carried it. Bonk Velho remained at her side, his presence steady and reassuring, as though he understood the magnitude of the task ahead. As dawn approached, Marguerite stood by her window, staring out at the forest. The cabin felt like a distant and ominous presence, hidden in the darkness of the trees. Bonk Velho sat beside her, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the turmoil within her heart. She knelt down, resting a hand gently on his head. "You've led us this far," she whispered. "I only hope we have the strength to finish what you started." The dog's dark eyes met hers, filled with an unfathomable depth that seemed to say, "You are not alone." Marguerite drew a deep breath and turned back to the room, resolved. The time for doubt had passed. Whatever the relic had bound to their land, they would face it together. Night fell over the Pyrenees, wrapping the convent and surrounding forest in an impenetrable shroud of darkness. The sisters, led by Mother Adele, moved solemnly through the woods toward the abandoned cabin. Each step was heavy with purpose and dread, the faint rustling of leaves and occasional snapping of twigs the only sounds accompanying their procession. Bonk Velho led the way, his silhouette sharp against the dim glow of their lanterns. His ears were alert, and his posture exuded unwavering determination, as if he understood the magnitude of the task ahead. "Keep close, and keep your faith," Mother Adele instructed, her voice cutting through the quiet. "The shadows will try to unsettle you, but we must not falter." Marguerite clutched the satchel containing the relic to her chest, feeling its weight grow heavier with every passing moment. She glanced back at Sister Colette, who was murmuring prayers under her breath, her rosary clutched tightly in her trembling hands. As they reached the clearing, the cabin loomed before them, its decaying structure emanating a foreboding presence. The air was colder here, thick with a palpable energy that made Marguerite's skin prickle. Bonk Velho stopped at the cabin's entrance, letting out a low growl. It was a warning, one that sent chills through the group. "Whatever happens, do not abandon the circle," Mother Adele reminded them, her tone resolute. The sisters nodded, their fear masked by the collective strength of their faith. Together, they stepped into the cabin, lanterns casting flickering light across the worn floorboards and the ominous slab in the center. The ritual began with the lighting of the candles, their faint flames struggling against the oppressive atmosphere. Mother Adele stood at the head of the group, her voice steady as she recited the ancient Latin invocations from the ledger. Marguerite placed the relic on the slab, unwrapping it carefully. The silver cross glinted in the dim light, its gemstones pulsing faintly as if alive. Bonk Velho lay at her feet, his low growl rumbling intermittently, a reminder of the unseen forces circling them. As the prayers grew louder, the air within the cabin shifted. A chill seeped into the room, and the flickering candlelight cast distorted shadows on the walls. The whispers returned, faint at first but growing steadily louder, a cacophony of anguished voices that seemed to rise from beneath the floorboards. "Keep praying," Mother Adele commanded, raising her voice above the din. The sisters tightened their circle, their prayers overlapping in a desperate attempt to maintain their focus. Marguerite's voice faltered as the shadows around the room began to move, coalescing into forms, tall, spectral figures with hollow, anguished eyes. "The knights," Marguerite whispered, her breath hitching as she recognized the outlines of armor and tattered cloaks. The spectral knights stepped forward, their movements slow and deliberate. Their faces were etched with centuries of torment, and their eyes glowed with an unearthly light. Bonk Velho stood, his growl deepening as he placed himself between the sisters and the advancing spirits. "They aren't here to harm us," Marguerite said, though her voice wavered. "They're trapped. They want to be freed." Mother Adele nodded, her expression unchanging as she continued the invocations. "Then we must not stop." As the final verses of the prayer echoed through the cabin, the relic began to glow, its gemstones casting a blood-red light that filled the room. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, and the spectral knights froze, their hollow eyes locked on the relic. Bonk Velho barked sharply, snapping Marguerite's attention back to the relic. The cross trembled on the slab, its glow intensifying as though it were fighting against the prayers. Mother Adele stepped forward, holding a vial of holy water above the relic. With this act, we sever the bond of the pact. May the souls of the betrayed find peace, and may the darkness be banished from this place. She poured the holy water over the relic. The moment the liquid touched the cross, a blinding light erupted from it, forcing the sisters to shield their eyes. A piercing wail filled the air, the sound of countless voices crying out in anguish, and then, silence. When the light faded, the relic lay shattered on the slab, its once glowing gemstones now dull and lifeless. The spectral knights began to dissolve, their tortured forms dissipating into soft wisps of light that ascended toward the heavens. Marguerite lowered her hands, tears streaming down her face as she watched the last of the spirits fade into the ether. The oppressive weight that had hung over the cabin lifted, replaced by a profound stillness. Bonk Velho walked to the shattered relic, sniffing it briefly before turning to Marguerite. His dark eyes met hers, and in that moment, she felt a wave of gratitude emanating from him, an unspoken acknowledgement of their shared purpose. "It's over," Mother Adele said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The pact is broken." The sisters stood in silence, the enormity of what they had achieved sinking in. Bonk Velho moved to the door, looking back at them once before stepping outside. "We should return to the convent," Mother Adele said finally, gathering the remaining tools. Marguerite lingered for a moment, her gaze following Bonk Velho as he disappeared into the forest. A sense of finality settled over her, an understanding that their guardian had fulfilled his purpose. As they made their way back to the convent, the wood seemed lighter, the oppressive shadows no longer clinging to the trees. Marguerite glanced up at the stars visible through the canopy, feeling a renewed sense of hope. But in her heart, she knew their journey wasn't entirely over. The bond she had felt with Bonk Velho hinted at something more, a truth yet to be revealed. The convent was still as the sisters returned in the early hours of the morning. For the first time in months, the air felt lighter, as if the weight of an ancient curse had been lifted. The moon bathed the courtyard in a silvery glow, and the towering walls of the convent seemed less foreboding. Bonk Velho paused at the gate, standing silently as Marguerite and the others passed through. His dark eyes followed their every movement, filled with a quiet intensity. "It's done," Marguerite whispered, glancing back at him. But as she did, something about his stance gave her pause. Mother Adele turned, placing a hand on Marguerite's shoulder. "Go inside and rest," she said gently. "We've done all we can. The convent will heal, and so will we." Reluctantly, Marguerite obeyed, but as she crossed the threshold, she looked back once more. Bonk Velho had not moved from the gate, his silhouette stark against the rising dawn. The day passed in a haze of exhaustion and quiet reflection. The sisters resumed their routines, though a profound stillness hung in the air, as if the walls of the convent were catching their breath. Marguerite, however, could not find peace. Her thoughts remained fixed on Bonk Velho and the journey they had taken together. She wandered the corridors aimlessly, the events of the previous night playing on a loop in her mind. By sunset, she found herself standing in the courtyard, searching the horizon for any sign of the dog. The wind carried the scent of pine from the forest, but Bonk Velho was nowhere to be seen. "Are you looking for him?" Marguerite turned to find Sister Colette watching her. "Yes," Marguerite admitted. "I thought he would stay." Colette's expression softened. "Perhaps his work is done. He brought us to the truth, led us through the darkness. Maybe it's time for him to leave." Marguerite nodded, though her heart clenched at the thought. That night, she awoke to a faint sound, the soft padding of paws on stone. Rising quickly, she wrapped herself in a shawl and hurried to the courtyard. There he was, standing in the moonlight, his coat glistening like on the night she first saw him. Bonk Velho's gaze met hers, and this time, it held something new, a quiet farewell. Marguerite approached him cautiously, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She knelt beside him, resting a trembling hand on his head. "Are you leaving?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Bonk Velho let out a low, soft whine, pressing his head gently against her palm. Tears welled in Marguerite's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." As if in response, Bonk Velho took a step back, his eyes lingering on hers for a moment longer before he turned toward the forest. He moved slowly at first, his black silhouette fading into the shadows of the trees. Marguerite stood there, watching until the last trace of him was gone. The days that followed were marked by a profound sense of peace within the convent. The oppressive energy that had haunted its halls for generations was gone, replaced by a lightness that none of the sisters could fully explain. The nights, once filled with whispers and flickering candles, were now calm. The West Wing, long abandoned and feared, became another part of the convent, its dark past finally laid to rest. Marguerite often walked the grounds, her thoughts returning to Bonk Velho. She felt his absence acutely, though it was tempered by the knowledge that his mission had been fulfilled. One morning, as she worked in the convent garden, Marguerite noticed movement near the gate. A small black dog stood there, its coat sleek and shiny, its eyes bright and curious. Her heart skipped a beat. The dog was different, smaller, younger, but something in its gaze felt familiar. Marguerite approached cautiously, her breath catching as the dog wagged its tail and stepped toward her. She knelt down, extending a hand, and the dog nudged it gently with its nose. "You've come back," she murmured, a tear slipping down her cheek. Mother Adele, watching from a distance, approached with a soft smile. "A new guardian, perhaps," she said. Marguerite nodded, a sense of hope blooming in her chest. Bonk Velho was gone, but his presence lingered in the newfound peace of the convent and the arrival of this new companion. Marguerite believed he had left behind a piece of himself, a reminder that light could be found even in the deepest shadows. The sisters resumed their prayers, their faith renewed by what they had experienced. And though they rarely spoke of the events surrounding Bonk Velho, each of them carried the memory of the dog who had guided them through the darkness. Months had passed since Bonk Velho disappeared into the forest, and the convent stood as a testament to resilience and renewal. The once heavy, oppressive silence had been replaced with the peaceful sounds of nature, birdsong, the rustle of leaves, and the distant rush of the mountain streams. The sisters moved through their days with a sense of purpose. Prayers, chores, and quiet reflection filled their routines, but now, a warmth accompanied their devotions. Even the West Wing, long abandoned and feared, had been reopened. Its dark history was no longer a shadow on their lives. The young black dog, whom Marguerite affectionately named Noir, became a constant presence in their lives. Though smaller and more playful than Bonk Velho, he carried the same calming energy. His bright eyes watched over the convent as if he understood its past and its need for protection. Noir followed Marguerite wherever she went, his small frame a reassuring presence at her side. The bond between them grew quickly, and Marguerite often felt as though Bonk Velho's spirit lingered in the little dog, guiding her still. One crisp morning, Marguerite found herself drawn to the library. She had avoided it since the night of the ritual, hesitant to revisit the texts that had uncovered the convent's dark secret. But something compelled her to enter. As she browsed the shelves, her fingers brushed against a small, leather-bound journal tucked between larger volumes. Curious, she pulled it free and opened it. The journal belonged to a monk who had lived centuries ago, one of the last members of the splintered Templar order that had once controlled the land. His entries were filled with sorrow and guilt, recounting the pact they had made in desperation. He wrote of their betrayal of sacred vows, the terrible price they had paid, and their hope that the relic would remain hidden forever. But it was the final entry that brought tears to Marguerite's eyes. A black hound appeared in the dark of our despair. A guardian sent not by man but by divine will, it stood watch over our cursed souls. When the pact is broken, and the burden lifted, I pray this guardian will remain to guide those who come after us. Marguerite closed the journal, her heart swelling with understanding. Bonk Velho had not been a mere coincidence, he was a protector, sent to guide the sisters through their darkest trial. Noir, she realized, was part of that same legacy, a symbol of the convent's redemption. Word of the convent's transformation began to spread. Pilgrims from nearby villages came seeking solace, drawn by rumors of miraculous peace that now surrounded the once shadowed grounds. The sisters welcomed them with open arms, offering prayers and compassion. Marguerite often walked among the visitors, Noir trotting at her heels. She found joy in their stories, their gratitude, and the quiet hope they brought with them. Mother Adele observed these changes with quiet pride. "The burden we carried has become a blessing," she said one evening, as she and Marguerite sat by the fire. "The darkness that once consumed this place has been replaced with light and faith." Marguerite nodded, gazing into the flames. "It was Bonk Velho who gave us the strength to face it. He taught us to trust not just in ourselves, but in something greater. And now," Mother Adele said, smiling, "that trust lives on, in you, and in Noir." One morning, as the first rays of sunlight broke over the mountains, Marguerite stood in the garden, tending to the flowers she had planted after the ritual. Noir lay nearby, his head resting on his paws, watching her work. The air was crisp, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine. Marguerite paused, looking out toward the forest. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure moving among the trees, a tall, black silhouette, standing motionless against the backdrop of sunlight and shadow. Her breath caught, and her heart swelled with a bittersweet ache. "Thank you," she whispered, knowing in her heart that Bonk Velho had not truly left them. The figure disappeared into the trees, and Marguerite turned back to her work. Noir barked softly, as if sensing her thoughts, and she smiled. The convent had found its peace, and so had she. Years later, the convent would be known as a place of miracles, a sanctuary for those seeking redemption and hope. The story of Bonk Velho, the mysterious black dog who guided the sisters through their darkest hour, was passed down, a tale of faith, courage, and the unbreakable bond between protector and protected. Noir grew older, his presence a source of comfort and joy to all who met him. And though he was not as imposing as his predecessor, he carried the same quiet strength, a reminder that even the smallest guardians could carry the greatest light. Marguerite, now one of the eldest sisters, often recounted the events of that fateful year to the younger nuns. Her voice would grow soft when she spoke of Bonk Velho, her eyes glistening with memories of the hound who had changed their lives forever. In the deepest corners of her heart, she knew he was still watching over them, just beyond the veil of the world. And as she prayed each night, she offered a silent thank you to the guardian who had taught them that even in the darkest shadows, there is always a path to the light. If you liked this story and want more content like this, leave a like, share it with someone you know will be moved by it, and of course, subscribe to the channel. Together, we will explore inspiring stories and moments that touch the heart. Until the next video.